Welcome to Breaking Down the Page with Brooke here, doing a white shirt review. Though my wife didn't quite agree, but I felt like showing off Spider-Man. But if I was wearing a tie properly, you wouldn't get to see it. Today we're going to talk about East of Eden. I'm going to go and address this to one of my friends, just trying to have a conversation with them. He's been working on some fiction, novel fiction, children's lit. And so, Rafe, this is for you. David Nance, if you're listening, or anyone else. Hopefully, we're going to be able to explore something that you'll find interesting. I might have a copy of East of Eden in a box from grad school that we uncovered, but I've been wanting to kind of break out that box on stream, but decided my wife was ordering some books, and I was just like, I want to get another copy because I've not read this in probably since like 2008, 2009. But I remember, I would say, kind of the most important parts so well. And I'm not gonna. I would love to actually do a complete read through and just talk through what we can learn from Steinbeck in his storytelling, and give my updated reaction since I've not read it since then. And I actually asked my wife to read it while we were engaged, and I was like, hey, we're gonna read this together. We'll read XYZ chapters. You get up to those. We're gonna read them together. We're gonna talk through them because it is, for me, peak fiction. And I know there's plenty of people who haven't read this. I've not read Grapes of Wrath. I read Tortilla Flats. I read Of Mice and Men, and the the storytelling is fine. Like, Steinbeck is just a great storyteller in general. But when it came to the content of the story and everything, the storytelling in this and the story and what he gives you and what he doesn't, is he's just one of the go-tos that I have. It's like I think about Steinbeck all the time when I'm writing. But it's been so long since I read his chapter openings, and it's like he had such a big effect on me in grad school and different drafts that I did with my chapter openings. So let's look at this and just keep in mind, ask yourself, how do you open a chapter? There's My typical thing is to set up a general scene, start with building out a location. I do try to make exceptions to that depending on how quickly I want a scene to be, but typically when I'm moving, I don't start with just general kind of overview of situation. I don't have a whole lot of kind of percolating thoughts on humanity, which is something that just when I was like flipping through this, that's what I was seeing, and I was just like, ooh, that's interesting. Like, ooh, when do I need to play with this a little bit more? Let's have some fun. Whereas sometimes I'll try to start with characters, but it's so easy to jump into characters and have them just floating in open space and not have a scene. I would rather kind of front load a situation, a location, the sense of space, and then get into the characters and what they're saying and kind of pepper more details about the location as we're going, rather than, oh, we need to move. Oh, by the way, they're in a bar and there's stairs over here. People are walking down the stairs. The door's over here, and then you have a fight break out where people coming down the stairs and through the door, and it's like you don't quite know where all they're at. This is wholly evident with. Oh, I just had a document I was going to break out. I'm sure I've shown it before. The map of one of my locations. Here it is. This is a Marionette Shop that I use in my novel. And this is like the front door. Here's the back door that goes to the shop. And then these are all aisles going in between, like, stages where marionettes are performing, magically performing. And just like, how do you set that up because of what happens in the scene, like later scenes? So it's like I set it up in chapter 2, and we really get the most out of it in chapter 9 or 10. And so here we're going to, let's just start reading. I was kind of surprised with how short the chapters were. So, chapter 1. So just keep in mind, what's the how close are we to characters? How far away from we are characters? How close are we to locations? Where are we going to start? So the Salinas Valley is in Northern California. Like, boom, we just get a basic geographical location. I picture a map. I picture the valley is kind of at the north part of California. It is a long, narrow swale between two ranges of mountains, and the Salinas River winds and twists up the center until it falls at last into Monterey Bay. So So when he says up the center, I picture that the river is actually flowing north into Monterey Bay. And I don't know the geographical locations a whole lot, but right there, we at least get the basics. We get the basics. We got two mountain ranges and a valley up the middle. I remember my childhood names for grasses and secret flowers. I remember where a toad may live and what time the birds awaken in the summer and what trees and seasons smelled like, how people looked and walked and smelled even. The memory of odors is very rich. All right, what's going on here with point of view? We start off with the Salinas Valley is in Northern California. It is along, and so it kind of starts reading a bit like a history book. It's very pulled back point of view, overall narrator. And then all of a sudden we get into I remember childhood names for grasses and secret flowers. Who is this I? And we're getting this from childhood. So we have the sense of like this person's an adult telling us this story. It is they are very purposely telling us this story as a first person narrator, even though most of the book you could say is you're going to find out spoilers. Most of the book is you could almost say like hearsay. Um, this is a story that's passed down through the ages, multiple generations of family. I want to say that you find out in chapter 2. This would we I believe if I believe this is one of the grandchildren of the Hamiltons. So, and I think they might mention this. I remember where a toad may live and what time the birds awaken in the summer and what trees and seasons smelled like, how people looked and walked and smelled even. The memory of odors is very rich. All right, we get sense of smell right there. We're getting visuals, we're getting sense of time, what time the birds awaken in the morning, what trees and what they smelled like. I remember that the Galliban Mountains to the east of the valley were light, gay mountains full of sun and loveliness and a kind of invitation, so that you wanted to climb into their warm foothills almost as you want to climb into the lap of a beloved mother. They were beckoning mountains with a brown grass love. The Santa Lucias stood up against the sky to the west and kept the valley from the open sea, and they were dark and brooding, unfriendly and dangerous. I always found in myself a dread of the West and a love of the East. Where I got such an idea, I cannot say, unless it could be that the morning came over the peaks of the Galabins and the night drifted back from the ridges of St. Lucius. It may be that the birth and death of the day had some part of my feeling about the two ranges of mountains. I'm gonna go and just bring up the name of the book is East of Eden, and I haven't read this in forever, so it's like as I'm getting this, it's almost coming to me like it's brand new. And it's like he is kind of could be setting up here that the East Mountains are more or less Eden. They're like this perfect place, and the valley is east of that. And what is Eden referencing? The Garden of Eden. What is east of that? That is, I believe, where Adam and Eve were driven out by an angel with like a sword of fire. Also, if you didn't know, spoilers, go read this. And I guess even before we get in this, go read the first several chapters. Go read part one, and then come back and read this. Or you can wait to listen to me read through it, or go to an audiobook, read a hard copy, whichever. Check out this book. Check out the storytelling. Write down questions. Take observations, especially if you're interested in writing, getting into storytelling. But the first events that we kind of get out of being east of Eden is Cain and Abel's story. All right, so there's where we start. We got this very far back storyteller. Then we zoom in to someone having memories of childhood. Let's move to, and also these chapters are broken up into parts. So that was part 1 of chapter 1. Here is part 2 of chapter 1, and we're going to go through the little parts and see kind of where we skip. So the previous section ends with, I'll just read the previous paragraph. I've spoken of the rich years when the rainfall was plentiful, but there was dry years too, and they put a terror on the valley. The water came in a 31-year cycle. There would be 5 or 6 wet years and wonderful years when there might be 19 to 25 inches of rain, and the land would shout with grass. It shouts. You can hear the grass. It's proclaiming. Oh, it's the visuals. Oh my gosh! And it's like I'm not someone that It's just not the type of writing that I get into, but it's like it's probably because I've just not read a whole lot, and so I hear this, I'm just like, that isn't interesting. The ground shouts with grass. Then would come 6 or 7 pretty good years of 12 to 16 inches of rain, and then the dry years would come, and sometimes there would be only 7 or 8 inches of rain. The land dried up, and the grasses headed out miserably, heated out a few inches high, and great bare scabby places around appeared in the valley. The live oaks got crusty look, and the sagebrush was gray. The land cracked with the springs, dried up, and the cattle listlessly nibbled dry twigs. Then the farmers and the ranchers would be filled with disgust for the Salinas Valley. The cows would grow thin and sometimes starve to death. People would have to haul water in barrels to their farms just for drinking. Some families would sell out for nearly nothing and move away, and it never failed that during the dry years the people forgot about the rich years, and during the wet years they lost all memory of the dry years. It was always that way. We get a lot of this in that first section is what's going to be called a model telling. Model telling is a story form that was identified by John Schultz in particular in writing from writing from start to finish. His book that we use at Columbia College Chicago. And a model form is just it's kind of pulling back, and you get a model form would be or similar. Model form would is you have you'd set up. Here's the broad spectrum and scope of something that happens. You have all right. All the boys go to this high school. All the boys play sports. All of them graduate. They have straight A's. All of them also leave with a drinking problem. All of them and all of them go to prestigious colleges. And then you would get, but there is this one dude who there's a small group of 5 guys that alter from that, and you get the general model of what's it like to go to that school, just in a very kind of pulled back, generalized way. Almost here he's kind of stereotyping. This is the general response is the model of this is what a chunk of farmers do. This is what a chunk of farmers do. And most people during those wet years, it's like this is the best thing ever. And then during the dry years, a lot of people tend to sell off. And we're getting you get a large passage of time with a lot of models. Another model would be what's your routine in the morning. Models can be a lot of routines. It's like you wake up, you brush your teeth, you shower, you grab a snack bar, go to work. Like that's your general day. That is the model that you are setting up. Same thing. You think about model Legos. It's like you have the model. Everyone makes the same thing if they follow the instructions. Model T. Everyone made the model of the same car. And then typically in writing, you would go and deviate from that model, and that's where your story starts, or exists kind of within that general model that the audience will understand. So, part 2, we're on page 6. And that was the Long Salinas Valley. Its history was like that of the rest of the state. So we're breaking up, we're pulling back that model to the rest of the state. First, they were Indians, an inferior breed without energy, inventiveness, or culture, a people that lived on grubs and grasshoppers and shellfish, too lazy to hunt or fish. They ate what they could pick up and planted nothing. They pounded bitter acorns for flour. Even their warfare was a weary pantomime. Wow. Then the hard, dry Spaniards. Then we get the next paragraph. When the Spaniards came, they give everything. We move on. Then the Americans came in a later paragraph. The Americans had a greater tendency to name places for people. All right, so here's the last paragraph of the chapter. The wind whistled over the settlements in the afternoon, and the farmers began to set out mile-long windbreaks for eucalyptus to keep the plowed topsoil from blowing away. So we get this very broad picture of the eucalyptus trees lining the fields. And this is about the way the Salinas Valley was when my grandfather brought his wife and settled in the foothills to the east of King City. So we're east of King City, and we established we're a grandkid. So chapter 2, part 1. It must depend on hearsay. Like I said, hearsay. Oh, I called it. On old photographs, on stories told, and on memories which are hazy and mixed with fable, and trying to tell you about the Hamiltons. They were not eminent people, and there are few records concerning them except for usual papers on birth, marriage, land ownership, and death. So right there, We get a general sense of how kind of unimportant, if we didn't have these few things, their record of even existing in history wouldn't be there. And he's been trying to do research, but it's hearsay, old photographs, and just these small little things that most people leave. Obviously, they don't have a social media profile. We can easily go look at people now and look at social media profiles. How much can you add to someone's obituary nowadays and their public record compared to 140 years ago? And this takes place post World War or post Civil War, before World War One. I want to say part two starts at the year 1900. When I was just flipping through the book and putting in all these little, I have a whole bunch of markers to be easily flip through. So we get that very pulled back. Here's the general information of who we're going to talk about. Think about it. It's like I tend to when I start chapters, if I was going to go back and look, it's like boom, I'm with characters in a moment. Let's go. In here, and I think some of that comes from the rush of just wanting to like get to the story and not slowing down enough to bring up some. I guess this pulls back, at least for me, it pulls me out of the story to think of larger concepts to then kind of process, let's say, during the chapter. So it's like here's the hearsay, now we're going to get into the hearsay. But he's just given us a warning. Like, this is hearsay. This is as far as I know how it happened. It was my granddad, right? How much I never got to know. I only got to know one of my biological grandparents until I was 12. I didn't get a whole lot of stories. Most of the stories I have about my grandparents come from my dad and my uncle. On my mom's side, and that's the side that I had the living grandmother. Young Samuel Hamilton came from the north of Ireland, and so did his wife. He was the son of small farmers, neither rich nor poor, who had lived on one landhold and in one stone house for many hundreds of years. The Hamiltons managed to be remarkably well educated and well read, and as so often true in that green country, they were connected and related to very great people and very small people, so that one cousin might be a baronet and another cousin a beggar, and of course they were descended from the ancient kings of Ireland, as every Irishman is. So we still got this very pulled back. Here's the general family lineage. This is the model of what it's like to come from Ireland. It's a model. He says this is like what everyone was like. Why Samuel left the stone house and green acres of his ancestors, I do not know. He was never a political man, so it is not likely a charge of rebellion drove him out, and he was scrupulously honest, which eliminates the police as prime movers. All right, let's skip through here. We got another paragraph, and then we get on page 9. He came to the Salinas Valley full blown and hearty, full of inventions and energy. His eyes were very blue. So now it's like we're on the second page of this chapter, and now we're getting a visual description. His eyes were very blue, and when he was tired, one of them wandered outward a little. He was a big man, but delicate in a way. In the dusty business of ranching, he seemed always immaculate. His hands were clever. He was a good blacksmith and carpenter and wood carver, and he could impose anything with bits of wood and metal. He was forever inventing a new way. So, without diving too deep just into the chapter, we get general family history as we're introducing this character. We got his eyes. We have a general sense for his shape. He was a big man but delicate in a way. So, in Steinbeck's really, this is a bit more of what I like to think of like a vaudevillian description. We just get a few things, and our imagination is there to kind of fill in the rest. We don't know hair color. We don't know the size of his teeth, the size of his hands necessarily. We just know that he's large but kind of delicate in ways. So you might think of him as lanky. You might think of him as like, I don't know. However you want. Think of him as bald, long shaggy hair. His eye wanders out a little. And there's that little detail. It's like not just that, but it's like, how did I describe it? When he was tired, one of them wandered outward a little. Picture that. All right. So we get kind of the family history here. When people first, so now page 12. What's the chapter? All right. So here's the Liza, his wife. She wore her hair always pulled back tight and bun behind it in a hard knot. And since I can't remember how she dressed, it must have been that she wore clothes that matched herself exactly. She had no spark of humor and only occasionally a blade of cutting wit. She frightened her grandchildren because she had no weakness. She suffered bravely and uncomplainingly through life, convinced that that was the way her God wanted her to live. She felt the rewards, felt that rewards came after. So one thing I'm going to mention just as we're starting the book, and I'm sure I'll go into this more whenever I just read the chapters and talk through them. We are getting just the general family background. There's no scene here. There's no dialogue. It's just, yo, chapter 1, here's a Salinas Valley. Chapter 2, hey, man, the Hamiltons live here. They were my grandparents. Here's the general background of them. This is all I know about my grandfather. This I know about my grandmother. This is how the events ran, because we know they already live in there's the question of, and I think they might get into this. I want to say they don't live in the better part of the Salinas Valley, so they have to work harder for their land. They didn't get the fertile stuff done by the river. That plays into it. So, and now we're going to pull back even more. When people first came to the West, particularly from the owned and fought over farmlets of Europe, and saw so much land to be had for the signing of a paper and the building of a foundation, an itching land greed seemed to come over them. They wanted more and more land, good land if possible, but land anyway. Perhaps they had filaments of memory of feudal Europe where great families became and remained great because they owned things. The early settlers took up land they didn't need and couldn't use. They took up worthless land just to own it, and all proportions changed. A man who might have been well to do on 10 acres in Europe was rat poor on 2,000 in California. That's more models. That's the first two chapters, largely models. And good chunks of chapter 3 are models and kind of covering general swaths of history. It wasn't very long until the land in the barren hills near King City and San Ardo was taken up and ragged families were scattered through the hills, trying their best to scratch a living from the thin, flinty soil. They and the coyotes lived clever, despairing, submarginal lives. They landed with no memory, no equipment, no tools, no credit, and particularly with no knowledge of the new country and no technique for using it. I don't know whether it was a divine stupidity or a great faith that let them do it. Surely such venture is nearly gone from the world, and the families did survive and grow. All right, you'll notice that I want to say if I read this silently, I could be taking this very seriously. Like you read that, they landed with no money, no equipment, no tools, no credit, and particularly with no knowledge of the new country and no technique for using it. I don't know whether it was divine stupidity or great faith that let them do it. It can read very solemn, but when I'm reading this out loud, there's a level of like wit and almost like sarcasm that Steinbeck is employing here with that line of for some I don't know whether it was a divine stupidity or a great faith that let them do it. Just a general like, man, it seems like it's one of these. Like I can't tell which of these two it is. These people seem crazy to me. Like they're rough, right? Surely such venture is nearly gone from the world. Like people don't do this anymore. They just don't, right? And the families did survive and grow. They had a tool or a weapon that is also nearly gone, or perhaps it is only dormant for a while. It is argued that because they believed thoroughly in a just moral God, they could put their faith there and let the smaller securities take care of themselves. But I think that that because they trusted themselves and respected themselves as individuals, they knew beyond a doubt that they were valuable and potential mortal units. Because of this, they could give God their own courage and dignity and then receive it back. Such things have disappeared, perhaps because men do not trust themselves anymore. And when that happens, there is nothing left except perhaps to find some strong, sure man, even though he may be wrong, and to dangle from his coattails. So there's going to be, we're breaking that model. There might be this strong dude that's able to overcome these problems. Almost at the end of the chapter, I know I'm just kind of reading this whole thing because of how important it is to kind of have this general context for how it sets up the final line. While many people came to Salinas Valley penniless, there were others who, having sold out somewhere else, arrived with money to start a new life. These usually bought land, but good land, and built their houses of planed lumber, and had carpets and colored glass diamond panes in their windows. Let's see that. We can actually get to see the quality of these houses, the character of these houses, the lumber, the colored windows, carpets. There were numbers of these families, and they got the good land of the valley and cleared the yellow mustard away and planted wheat. Such a man was Adam Trask. So all of a sudden, we got the Hamiltons for an entire chapter. Now we're going to go focus on the Trasks. And let's see where we start in the next chapter. Adam Trask was born on a farm in the outskirts of a little town which was not far from a big town in Connecticut. He was an only son, and he was born 6 months after his father mustered into a Connecticut regiment in 1862. Adam's mother ran the farm, bore Adam, and still had time to embrace a primitive theosophy. She felt that her husband would surely be killed by the wild and barbarous rebels, and she prepared herself to get in touch with him in what she called the beyond. He came home 6 weeks after Adam was born. His right leg was off at the knee. He stumped in on a crude wooden leg he himself had carved out of beech wood, and already it was splitting. He had in his pocket and placed on the parlor table the lead bullet they had given him to bite while they cut off his frayed leg. Let me get some water real quick. All right. So immediately we we're teleported over to Connecticut. Small town, from not that big of a town in Connecticut. We're on a farm, so picture what you will for a farm. I picture farm. I picture fence posts, not necessarily barbed wire. I'm not. Barbed wire may be a thing by this point. I want to say barbed wire came about in the 1800s during kind of the launching of the cattle ranches and stuff. Farmhouse. I always picture this as a single-story triangle roof, like log house, but that's probably not even accurate. But that's just kind of how we don't get a whole lot of details on that, so you can really fill that in with your imagination. Like I said, vaudeville, you get a few small things on the stage, and then you're like you get a bench in vaudeville, a light post, and you get a sense people are outside, or people are in a car if they're on like stacked benches, and then you fill in all the other background. So, and then we get into a story. We don't get into any dialogue here. This is just general covering history. Much much better way than a history book, I'll add. Where we zoom in here to this moment after he was born, and just this quick few sentences. His right leg was off with him coming in the door. He came home 6 weeks later after Adam was born. His right leg was off at the knee. He stumped in on a crude wooden leg he himself had carved out of beechwood, and already it was splitting. He had in his pocket and placed on the parlor table the lead bullet they had given him to bite while they had cut off his leg. So we get more history of Adam's mom, Cyrus, in chapter 3 at the beginning. Get the death of Lincoln. Here's the last paragraph of that section. It was the little boys who really caught it. Cyrus had decided that even though the army was not perfect, it was still the only honorable profession for a man. He mourned the fact that he could not be a permanent soldier because of his wooden leg, but he could not imagine any career for his sons except the army. He felt a man should learn soldiering from the ranks as he had. Then he would know what it was about from experience, not from charts and textbooks. He taught them the manual of arms when they could barely walk. By the time they were in grade school, close order drill was as natural as breathing and as hateful as hell. He kept them hard with exercises, beating out the rhythm with a stick on his wooden leg. He made them walk for miles, carrying knapsacks loaded with stones to make their shoulders strong. He worked constantly on their marksmanship in the wood lot behind the house. All right, chapter 19, bottom, at least in my copy, which is the one you can see on the picture I have up on the screen. When a child first catches adults out, when it first walks into his grave, little head, that adults do not have. All right, I'm going to pause and try rereading this again. When a child first catches adults out. Okay, so when they catch adults doing something that adults might not know that they're being watched. When it first walks into his grave little head that adults do not have divine intelligence, that their judgments are not always wise, their thinking true, their sentences just, his world falls apart into panic, desolation. All right, so um, I had to take that whole sentence together. So we're now getting an observation of life from Steinbeck, from the overall storyteller, or from the kid, whichever kid is the grandkid, saying there's a moment when a child realizes adults can be idiots or adults can be wrong. Adults aren't perfect. So we're getting that general. We're gonna start that on this section. That's where we're. So this is a moment where it's like we went from kind of a, and to an extent, this statement is can be leading into a model, whereas there's a moment where it's universal that this always happens, right? Now we're gonna break that. We're gonna get into the specifics of this. Break the model after we get a little bit more in this paragraph. The gods are fallen and all safety gone. And there is one thing about the fall of gods, they do not fall little. They crash and shatter or sink deeply into green muck. It is a tedious job to build them up again. They never quite shine, and the child's world is never quite whole again. It is an aching kind of growing. Wow. Adam found his father out. It wasn't that his father changed, but that some new quality came to Adam. He'd always hated the discipline, and every normal animal does, but it was just and true and inevitable as measles, not to be denied or cursed, only to be hated. And then, a very fast, almost a click in the brain, Adam knew that, for him, at least, his father's methods had no reference to anything in the world, but his father. Wow. Wow. The techniques and training were not designed for the boys at all, but only to make Cyrus a great man. And the same click in the brain told Adam that his father was not a great man, that he was, indeed, a very strong-willed and concentrated little man wearing a huge busby. Who knows what causes this? A look in the eye, a lie found out, a moment of hesitation. Then God comes crashing down in the child's brain. So we're getting this coming of age moment just in the first beginning of this section, and that's kind of what we're going. I want to say what's explored through the rest of this. But this I take this note just because, like I said, for myself, and I think it's because I don't write stuff. At least it's been a while since I've written stuff that kind of covers swaths of history or large chunks of time. Most of my novel work, I guess I get that more in one of my other short stories. I wish he'd been, or I wish he'd been Superman, or something like that is the title. If I don't have it posted up now, I'll get it posted because I have done some reading on it and have some live reactions from my friend Ro as we discuss it. All right, we find out that Charles is born. All right, starting section, the end of 2-2 or 3-2. As Adam grew, he feared one thing more than any other. He feared the day he would be taken and enlisted in the army. His father never let him forget that such a time would come. He spoke of it often. It was Adam who needed the army to make him a man. Charles was pretty near a man already, and Charles was a man and a dangerous man, even at 15 and when Adam was 16. So Charles is his brother, I believe, born from a separate wife. The affection between the boys had grown with the years. It may be that part of Charles's this is part 3-3. It may be that part of Charles's feeling was contempt, but it was a protective contempt. It happened that one evening the boys were playing Pee-wee, a new game to them, in the dooryard. A small pointed stick was laid on the ground, then struck near one end with the bat. The small stick flew into the air, and then was batted as far as possible. So right here we just get a how-to / model of how you play Pee-wee. Just describe it. Hey, this is how you play it. Then we're going to get into a scene with them. One of the first kind of slowed down, like non-generalized scenes up to this point, I think. Because I want to say a lot of it's very much, we got a description of who Adam was as a child, how he interacted with his mothers. I'm like, do I want to dive into this? We'll wait. Where do we go next? All right. Part 4. 3/4/28. There was no talk at supper. The quiet was disturbed only by the slurp of the soup and gnash of chewing. What happened before this? We actually get some dialogue in chapter 3 finally. You asked a question, I guess I'll have to answer. Maybe it's good and maybe it's bad to answer it. You're not clever. You don't know what you want. You have no proper fierceness. You let other people walk over you. Sometimes I think you're a weakling who will never amount to a dog turd. Does that answer your question? I love you better. I always have. This may be a bad thing to tell you, but it's true. I love you better. This is Cyrus talking to Adam. Else why would I have given myself the trouble of hurting you? Now shut your mouth and go to your supper. I'll talk to you tomorrow night. My leg aches. Let's just say that some stuff happened between Adam and Charles while they were playing Pee-wee. Let's just leave it at that. Go read it. Check it out. There was no talk at supper, so time skip here. The quiet was disturbed only by the slurp of the soup and gnash of chewing, and his father waved his hand to try to drive the moths away from the chimney of the kerosene lamp. Adam thought his brother watched him secretly, and he caught an eye flash from Alice when he looked up suddenly. After he finished eating, Adam pushed back his chair. I think I'll go for a walk, he said. The rest of that chapter is probably my favorite section of the book. Just spoilers. We're not going to look at it now, though. All right. Getting late on time. I will note on chapter 5 here, so we got chapters 3 and 4 are about the Trasks, and now we're going back to the Hamiltons. You'll notice on the ranch, the little Hamiltons began to grow up, and every year there was a new one. George was the tall, handsome boy, gentle and sweet. So now we get general history of them. There is probably, yeah, we get just the history of the kids. Doesn't look like there's any dialogue quotes. Just we're getting towards the end, we get a little bit of dialogue where they slow down enough to get that, but most of it's general. Because then, chapter 6, we go back to Adam joined the army and Cyrus moved to Washington. Charles lived alone on the farm. He boasted about getting himself a wife, but he did not go out doing it by the usual process of meeting girls, taking them to dances, testing their virtues or otherwise, and finally slipping feebly into marriage. The truth of it was that Charles was abysmally timid of girls, and like most shy men, he satisfied his normal needs in the anonymity of the prostitute. There is great safety for a shy man with a whore. Having been paid for in advance, she had become a commodity, and shy man can be gay with her and even brutal to her. Also, there is none of the horror of the possible turn down, which shrivels the guts of timid men. Wow. Is that Steinbeck here making comments about people, or is this the wisdom of the grandchild of the Hamiltons making these broad assertions, which are, at least we can say within the world of the book, I'll take it as gospel. But I would say there is some general truth that he's making observations of here. Because, boy, is it annoying. I'm married, but boy, is it annoying and difficult sometimes, and just getting the bravery to ask out ladies. There's so much that can go wrong in social dynamics. Scared you're going to affect relationships, possibly asking out other girls if you're going to know. And then, I guess we'll wind up here. I'm going to jump to chapter 7. Probably my second chapter favorite chapter of the book. Or no, it's chapter 8. So chapter 7, though, starts Adam spent his next 5 years doing the things an army uses to keep its men from going insane. Endless polishing of metal and leather, parade and drill escort, ceremony of bugle and flag, a ballet of business for men who aren't doing anything. Then we get just general kind of history of his time in the army and what happens from there. I don't think we get any combat scenes. Then chapter 7.2, we get Charles received very few letters. Sometimes he did not inquire at the post office for weeks. So general breadth of time passed. In February of 1894, when a thick letter came from a firm of attorneys in Washington, the postmaster thought it might be important. He walked out to the task floor and found Charles cutting wood and gave him the letter. And since he had taken so much trouble, he waited around to hear what the letter said. Charles let him wait. Very slowly he read all 5 pages and went back and read them again, moving his lips over the words. Then he folded it up and turned toward the house. The postmaster called after him, "Anything wrong, Mr. Trask?" "My father is dead," Charles said, and he walked into the house and closed the door. That's about all we get of that scene, and then we kind of move on to him telling Adam and stuff. Oh, although we finally get large chunks of dialogue at the end of 7.2 and in 7.3 with Adam coming to the village. Yeah, we're finally 60 pages in, and we're starting to get scenes with more scenes. And granted, we get some stellar scenes in chapter 3. Let's be honest now. I didn't really go into them. Peak drama. Go check it out. In chapter 8, we're going to read the first few sections, and I'm not going to go too deep. I'm just going to start with the first page and then maybe get into the beginnings of the rest of the chapters in the second video. So, let's look at where we're starting with this, all right? I believe there are monsters born in the world to human parents. All right, let's wind back. Where did we end the last chapter? Got convo between Charles and Adam. Yes, said Adam. We'll use the money well. Maybe we'll stay here. Maybe we'll go away. Maybe to California. We'll have to see what we'll do. And of course, we must set up a monument to our father, a big one. I couldn't ever go away from here, said Charles. Well, let's see how it goes. There's no hurry. We'll feel it out. I want to say they got a big payout from the government. There is a whole lore involving Cyrus Trask that we get into in these first 7 chapters. All set up. All just prepping for what's going to happen. Oh. Chapter 8. I believe there are monsters born in the world to human parents. Where is this going? We got Steinbeck / storyteller here, third person, telling it like it's first person, like this is like global fact. I believe there are monsters born in the world to human parents. What does that mean? Some you can see, misshapen and horrible, with huge heads or tiny bodies. Some are born with no arms, no legs, some with 3 arms, some with tails or mouths in odd places. They are accidents and no one's fault, as to be thought. Once they were considered the visible punishment for concealed sins. And just as there are physical monsters, can there not be mental or psychic monsters born? Where are we going with this? The face and body may be perfect, but if a twisted gene or a malformed egg can produce physical monsters, may not the same process produce a malformed soul? We're going deep. Deep dive into monsters. Monsters are variations from the accepted normal to a greater or a less degree. As a child may be born without an arm, so may one be born without kindness or the potential of conscience. A man who loses his arms in an accident has a great struggle to adjust himself to the lack, but one born without arms suffers only from people who find him strange. Having never had arms, he cannot miss them. Sometimes, when we are little, we imagine how it would be to have wings, but there is no reason to suppose it is the same feeling birds have. No, to a monster the norm must seem monstrous, since everyone is normal to himself. To the inner monster it must be even more obscure, since he has no visible thing to compare with others. To a man born without conscience, a soul-stricken man must seem ridiculous. To a criminal, honesty is foolish. You must not forget that a monster is only a variation, and that to a monster, the norm is monstrous. It is my belief that Kathy Ames was born with the tendencies or lack of them, which drove and forced her all of her life. So boom, we got, hey man, I think like we're given a preliminary argument. Just this is the thoughts of the author, the storyteller. I think that there's monsters, man. I think some people are crazy, and we can't even tell. We get this just beautiful opening page, start of chapter 7 or chapter 8, sorry. And now we're going to dive into the who. We got the what. It is my belief that Kathy Ames was born with the tendencies or lack of them, which drove and forced her all of her life. Some balance wheel was misweighted, some gear out of ratio. She was not like other people, never was from birth. And just as a cripple may learn to utilize his lack so that he becomes more efficient in a limited field than the uncrippled, so did Kathy use her difference, make a painful and bewildering stir in her world. Got that general, this is the model. This is what you can come to expect going forward. This is like nothing is going to end well with Kathy, all right? Let's just that's kind of what the that's not just me saying that, that's the author kind of look out, fam. Look out. Big F's in the chat for anyone that runs into Kathy, am I right? There was a time when a girl like Kathy would have been called possessed by the devil. She would have been exorcised to cast out the evil spirit, and after many trials that did not work, she would have been burned as a witch for the good of the community. The one thing that not be forgiven a witch is her ability to distress people, to make them restless and uneasy and even envious. As though nature concealed a trap, Kathy had formed from the first a face of innocence. Her hair was gold and lovely. Wide-set hazel eyes with upper lids that drooped made her look mysteriously sleepy. Her nose was delicate and thin, and her cheekbones high and wide, sweeping down to a small chin so that her face was heart-shaped. Her mouth was well-shaped and well-lipped, but abnormally small, what used to be called a rosebud. Her eyes were very little, without lobes, and they pressed so close to her head that even with her hair combed up they made no silhouette. They were thin flaps sealed against her head. All right, we're going to stop with the description, but you'll notice we went from this general, there's monsters on the inside, and she's always been trouble, to all of a sudden, but on the outside, she looks pretty. She looks pretty. She looks delicate. She looks like a normal, kind of attractive young lady. And I would say if you were gonna describe characters from the Bible, she is the Jezebel of Jezebels. Spoilers. Go read this chapter. Go take notes on this chapter. Go just see how Steinbeck sets everything up, how he tells it, how he describes it, gives us the visuals of what's happening, of the locations, the relationships between people, all of the signs that are given that or that you might this is one of those chapters where I had to go, you go back and read back a second time and it's kind of like, oh, that's why she did that. Yeah, this is one of those chapters. And it is, let's look at the chapter length. We're on chapter 8, starting at page 71, and it goes to 88. So let's say first 7 chapters, about 10 pages per chapter average. There's one chapter. I think chapter 6 is only like 2 pages or something. In here we're getting 17 pages, which is significantly more than most of the other chapters. Chapter 3 is probably pretty long in comparison with the others because that has just at least two different kind of longer action sequences with some other instances of Adam interacting with his stepmother. But yeah, go check this out. Here we are looking at breaking down the pages of chapter openings, part 1 of a series, Read East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This is Brooke. Toss out some likes. Look me up on social media. I should have this up on a few different sites. I'll put all the links below. Have an awesome day and get reading.